Albumin is the first item on the blood work I want to discuss. I want to discuss albumin and how to interpret the effects of dehydration on this and all the other blood values. That dehydration component will be at the end. So albumin, ALB, it's underrated. It doesn't get much fanfare. It's not usually the cause of an acute illness when you're in an emergency clinic, but it is seen over time on your annual wellness blood work at the vet. And it doesn't get enough attention. So it's one of the most important things on the blood work, and we don't pay as much attention to it. So it's the most important protein in the blood. What it does is it grabs onto molecules, hormones, electrolytes, drugs, all sorts of things in the blood and carries them through the liquid part of the blood so that they don't just fall away or fall out. It carries them to where they're going until at their destination, some cell or other enzyme or process reaches in and grabs them and takes it where it needs to go. So albumin holds on to things in the blood and transports them, but it also holds the liquid component of the blood in there. When you have low albumin or low protein, the fluid leaks out of the blood, and that's where people get swollen feet and ankles and distal limbs. Because albumin has a thing called oncotic pressure, which is the exact opposite force as osmosis. So a lot of you remember osmosis is kind of like diffusion. Osmosis is when you drop a drip of dye in some water and it pretty quickly spreads out and evenly distributes itself. That's diffusion. Osmosis is when you do that and it travels through a membrane of some sort, like a coffee filter. Well, albumin provides oncotic pressure, which is the opposite force. It holds everything in the blood so it doesn't all just leak out. That's drugs, electrolytes, hormones, molecules, all sorts of things. Keeps them in the blood and it keeps the fluid in the blood, or else the liquid would just leak out and you'd be a big puffy ball of edema. All right? So it's important. So where does it come from? What do we know about it? Albumin is made in the liver. It's made from the protein that you eat that gets absorbed through your gut, through your diet. So if the albumin is low, it can mean that your liver is not working correctly to make albumin from the proteins in your diet. That's a possibility. That's one of the things that we see. The other thing that can be is that you're not absorbing the protein from your gut and your diet correctly, so there's not enough protein getting to the liver to make albumin. And then the third big thing is if the kidneys aren't working right, they'll allow the albumin in the blood to leak out through the urine instead of staying in the blood where it's belonged. So what I see most often is low albumin is due to gut inflammation, the lining of the intestines. This is inflammatory bowel disease. You may be eating enough protein, enough of the right protein, but it's just not getting absorbed properly. So there's not enough protein for your liver to make albumin. So if your digestion is not right and you're not absorbing your protein properly, if you have low albumin, look how this affects you. It causes edema, it causes drugs and electrolytes and hormones to not be circulating properly. That's what I see most often. We talk about diet and nutrition. A lot of people will think you're just not eating enough protein. I've seen a lot of stray island dogs and homeless dogs that are really skinny, just a bag of bones, looking terrible. Their albumin is usually okay. It's not usually very, very low because the body knows how important albumin is. The body will break down muscle and fats and other parts of your body, bones and ligaments. It'll break them down and recycle them into a protein that the liver can use to make albumin. So it's not often that the albumin is low due to poor diet or malnutrition. It's usually that the gut is inflamed because we are eating the wrong things. They have plenty of protein in them, but they cause so much inflammation in the gut that the gut can't absorb the proteins properly. So another thing about the albumin is you're not necessarily looking for a flag. So when the blood work prints out, if something's high or low, it'll be highlighted in red, or there'll be a big capital H beside it to say it's high, because we're looking at 2 pages or more of information. So if you're skimming through it in a hurry in an emergency situation, you may miss 1 or 2 things that are elevated. So they're usually highlighted in red. But the albumin, in my mind, it's often borderline low. The range is usually 2.7 to something, 4, I think. Well, I see a lot of them around 2.7, 2.8. So they're not highlighted in red as being low, or blue, I think is for low. They're not highlighted for being wrong. They're right on the edge of normal. But I don't like that. That's not optimal. I like for the protein to be up in the middle range somewhere, not to be near the bottom, because it's just too important for too many life functions. You can't live without albumin. That's why I started off as the first one I want to discuss, because it's so important to life, but it's just not that exciting when you're sick. It's not usually what you're looking for when your animal goes in sick, okay? Um, so low is usually the problem, usually diet. It can be high, but this is rare. And if it is high, it's usually a tenth or 2/10 of a point high. The only reason that we know of that it's high is if you're dehydrated or your pet is dehydrated. Same for people and pets. So think of it this way. If you have a certain amount of albumin in a certain volume of blood, that's how it's measured. If you have less volume of blood due to dehydration, but the same amount of albumin, that's a fraction, that's a ratio thing. It now looks like you have more albumin than you have because you're comparing it to a smaller volume of blood. So the only time the albumin is a little bit high is if you're dehydrated. So it's very important for that. And again, the vast majority of the time, vast majority of the time, when I see low or suboptimal albumin, it's from gut inflammation like inflammatory bowel disease, and we need to be addressing that while maybe feeding a higher protein diet, but not just higher protein, higher quality protein while we're fixing the gut inflammation. Okay, thanks.